So we're going to be talking about aiming stability in today's video, and I know I get a lot of questions on this, especially when I dog the Tactical Foregrip, which I do in a lot of my best class set of videos, saying it's not even worth talking about, it's not even worth looking at, and there's a lot of reason for that. So that's what we're going to discuss in today's video, what this perk actually does, and why it is and isn't valuable at the exact same time. If you enjoyed the video, learned something new, please do me a favor, hit that like button. Go on today's video, it's 3,000 likes, so hopefully you guys can crush that number. If you're brand new, looking to find your way back for more Call of Duty content, just make sure you subscribe with notifications on. There are different ways that you can equip this particular pro when it comes to attachments. Right here we have a weapon, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the weapon is. This is pretty standard on most of the weapons that you're going to have some kind of attachment that goes towards it. Obviously we have recoil control, which we have right here in the Colossus suppressor, which is unique to this weapon. But recoil control is typically the vertical height of that recoil pattern gets shrunk down. So the overall recoil pattern kind of gets shrunk. So even if it goes diagonal, it'll still help a little bit on kind of narrowing it down and tightening it up horizontally slightly, but majority of the work is bringing down that vertical recoil of whatever the recoil pattern is. So that one's pretty straightforward. Then we also have the recoil stabilization, which is more how much bouncing from side to side as the recoil pattern goes up. There are certain weapons where they kind of do this all the way up. There's other ones where they kind of just do this. There's other ones where they kind of do whatever, or they go and then they thin out or whatever. So that actual bouncing effect gets kind of tightened up as well. And that's normally what the recoil stabilization is. Just tightening that bounce, not necessarily shrinking the overall recoil, but kind of tightening up that pattern. So if it kind of does a line where it does this, it's not going to shrink the thing like this, but instead of going like this, it'll actually be able to draw the line smoother and be a little bit easier to trace. So some weapons, it's more of an issue than others, but it really just depends on which weapon we're talking about. So those are the two main things there that you normally use on most weapons and you see players use most often. The thing that really gets a little bit tricky is this other stat, which is aiming stability, which is often built into other attachments. And that is why the Tactical Foregrip kind of ends up going low on my list, because if I wanted that, I could just use the Commando Foregrip. Maybe I don't get as much aiming stability, but I get some there. If I go to the Ranger Foregrip, I also get aiming stability. Obviously, there's some cons associated with that, whether it's the aim down sight speed or the movement speed, whichever one's affected by that, it's part of that. So there's region, maybe, hey, you know what? I want a little bit of aiming stability, but I still want some recoil control. Probably not going to use a Tactical Foregrip. That's why it ranks pretty low on the list. But there are scenarios where the Tactical Foregrip might be the best option in terms of actually these. It's just very rare, and you got to know how the weapons work. Other attachments that allow for that are the rear. You could actually put on aiming stability for the actual stock versus some of these other options that actually hurt aiming stability for faster aim down sight. So if we go with the F-Tac XL Elite Comb, you can see aiming stability is worsened. And aiming stability as a stat is primarily geared towards idle sway, and idle sway becomes particularly important when you fire your weapon, before you fire your weapon and during the time you're firing this weapon, because that particular movement that the gun's doing is applied to the entire recoil pattern, which a lot of times people don't realize, but this is pretty old news, I think. I think just most YouTubers generally just don't talk about it because either one, they don't really understand or care about the concept, and the other attachments tend to do the job quite well. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about that right here. And you can see this post is from 3 months ago. It says, discovery, recoil patterns are affected by aiming stability. Same gun, different pattern. And you can see that just by adjusting the stability, you would expect it to be the exact same recoil pattern if it did nothing. But there's a lot that goes into this, and this is like 100 pages of me trying to argue my case. I think there was a longer article even closer when the game first came out. And at the end of the day, does it affect the recoil? Yes. Does it affect the ways that you really want it to affect it? Not usually. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this looks in game and what we're actually trying to solve for and how effective these are in a real scenario. So the first thing we'll talk about in general is idle sway. So pretty much how idle sway works is how much the gun will actually move when you're aiming at something. So you can see right here, it kind of has a little bit of bounce, and every weapon has a little bit of different bounce depending on how the weapon is equipped with the various attachments. If you put on a nose stock, so there's way too many variables, and it's almost impossible to quantify, because do you go it goes right 3 units, it goes up 7 units, and then it goes back down 2 units, and then to the left. Even if you went frame by frame at the fastest FPS, it would still be tricky to track. You'd almost have to put something on the cursor and then kind of draw it out, and you'd see that it eventually loops or has like a, you know, a pendulum effect or whatever you want to call it. But that's pretty much what you'd be looking at. I haven't actually moved my thing, and you can see it's kind of drifted over a little bit. And that's kind of normal. It's going to continue to drift. Depending on the weapon, it has a different pattern. What we'll notice is as soon as I put on all the aiming stability, the idle sway is going to completely stop and it's going to stand still. So I've put on 3 attachments. This one doesn't have a rear grip, so unfortunately you're not able to put that on. But I went the Tactical Foregrip, which is only for that. Aiming stability, we got the Citadel and then the Tac Laser, which all 3 help. You can see the stat bars, tons of recoil control, tons of accuracy, even though there's literally nothing helping with recoil control. They basically have assigned certain values to those little bars, and they go up or down depending on what you change them to. So we'll do is take a look here, and now when at ADS, you can see that this gun does not really move. Like, just stare at it, doesn't really move. There's hardly no idle sway, and because of that, it impacts the recoil in a positive way, and that positive way is that you'll continue to get a consistent recoil pattern back to back to back to back. Whereas if you fire when the other idle sways, if you happen to fire when it goes all the way to the left and it does some funky recoil pattern, it's going to look different if you happen to pull the trigger on the right. So that's why typically when I try to do my test, even though I'm not stacking with aiming stability, what I'll try and do is line it up here and then ADS and fire at the same time, so that it gets as close as possible. If they don't look good when I do my recoil test, I exit the match and do it again until I get them to that pretty much match for that individual timing. We can get some relatively consistent recoil patterns. Obviously I can stack it with all the aiming stability, but then that recoil pattern you get from using that attachment will be slightly different than what you get from using that attachment and all those other ones. So to try and make it as consistent as possible, even though it's not perfect, because even if you stack this, if you could stack it with 10 attachments that were for aiming stability, you're still going to get slight variations in the recoil pattern, primarily because there is still a little bit of randomness built into that predictive recoil. So pretty much what we're going to take a look at here is 3 different kilo class setups. We have the max aiming stability option with 60 round mag. We have the lowest recoil option with the 60 round mag. And then we have the best class setup, which a majority of the player base uses in Warzone, with the exception of maybe the optic. They swap it out for maybe a holographic. And overall, I'm going to explain why most people end up with this individual class setup over either one of these, even though they're superior in those individual categories. So first one up, aiming stability. So first thing we got to take a look at here, you can see this thing has no idle sway. I'm going to try and kind of line them up as I fire them, but the first thing we're going to look at here is this one here, and there's the 60 bullets. And overall, look at this recoil pattern, kind of goes up, a little bit diagonal left, and then up, and kind of has a little bit of side-to-side bounce, but overall, nothing crazy. Let's go ahead and see how this looks. Obviously, this is the lowest recoil weapon in the game, especially when you stack it the right way. So that is part of it. But I want to kind of show you something that would definitely show some consistency here of why you end up choosing certain attachments over others. So pretty much we have the dot right there. This is the lowest recoil option. You can see it has a little bit of idle sway, but nothing game breaking. Let me make sure I'm backed up, lined up here. Lined up with the shot here, and we'll strafe over, and then we'll go ahead and fire this. So let's go ahead and 60 bullets. So pretty much everyone can see this one clearly gives you the best recoil out of these two. Now let's go ahead and look at the best class setup, or at least what most people tend to use in Warzone. Oh, we got it there. Make sure I'm lined up. We'll get it strafe over. And we'll fire. You can see it's lined up on the left side. All right. So Overall, this does less recoil because we're actually accounting for recoil control. It does have a little bit of kick to the side. So why would aiming stability matter? So the difference here is that if we did aiming stability on all of our guns, but overall, almost every single time we do this recoil pattern on the left with the max stabilization, we're pretty much going to get the exact same recoil pattern every single time. When we go with the lowest recoil, it's going to be slightly different for the reason we talked about earlier, and that's because there is some idle sway. Normally, other attachments do have built-in idle sway reduction, which is that aiming stability, which we got from the Commando. We also got from the stock tac laser. We got from the Ranger foregrip. So there's different things that are happening here. You can see there's a little bit of movement here, and basically any of these micro spots that we could pull the trigger at any one of these spots while it's going through its idle sway motion will give us a slightly different recoil pattern. And depending on the weapon, it could be significant or it could be minuscule. It really depends on the recoil pattern of the weapon. Obviously, you'd have to go through, kind of feel it, see if it makes a difference. But in reality, these recoil patterns will vary slightly based off where you were at in that idle sway pattern. So that's why there could be some variation. But generally, that's why most people tend to lean towards the same attachments, because they're combining the recoil control that we're looking for, recoil stabilization, and then stabilization or aiming stability. So we get the best of both. And even though our aiming stability isn't 100% not moving and is going to give us that perfect recoil pattern every single time, it is mitigating some of the recoil and some of the side to side to help stabilize that recoil, so the recoil is a little bit more manageable. Obviously not as manageable as zero recoil, which gives us sometimes the slowest aim down sight possible. And even though it's amazing to have the exact same recoil pattern pretty much every single time, if you have half the recoil, it's probably still a little bit more manageable, even if you know what the recoil pattern is. I don't really think it's all that important, because most of the time, if you're going to stack on attachments, if you're going to go for aiming stability, the best recoil control options already have that built in. So I don't really think it's ever worth using, especially when the Commando foregrip also gets aiming stability, especially when the Ranger foregrip also gets aiming stability. So overall, it's like, well, there you go. Makes it pretty easy decision there that the Tactical Foregrip is basically useless. I would never use. And odds are the Tactical Foregrip's never going to perform better than the Commando or the Ranger Foregrip. So hopefully you guys found the video helpful, learned something new. If you did, please remember to hit that like button. If you're brand new, want to find your way back for more Call of Duty content, make sure you subscribe with notifications on. Do appreciate all the support on the channel. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.